My story begins not in Elgin, however. It begins in Dundee, Illinois, just north of here. My parents, I was born January 27, 1890. My parents, Frederick and Jenny, were both born and raised in Dundee. Their parents, my grandparents, were pioneer settlers.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Pioneers.
Your name was? Supposed to be
Perry.
Perry.
Perry is my name. And they were pioneer settlers of Dundee and are buried in West Dundee Cemetery. I had a sister, Winifred, but she died in infancy. So I ended up growing up as an only child. So how did I get to Elgin? At the age of 6, my family moved to town. Father took a job at the watch factory. We lived on Raymond Street, just a few blocks up the hill from the factory. I attended Lincoln Elementary School. That was on the corner of National and St. Charles Street. Sadly, that building is no longer standing. I graduated from Elgin High School in 1908. Now that building is still standing, and it was a brand new high school on Chicago Street when I graduated. I received a full scholarship to Northwestern University and earned a degree in English. My love for writing made my career choices inevitable. I first began my career teaching in Denmark. Not in the country, but in Denmark, the town in Iowa. I then moved to Minnesota, where I taught at St. Croix and in Stillwater. And in all 3 high schools, I helped establish school newspapers. I also established a program for budding young journalists who could practice their writing skills and submit articles to their local papers. Now, my teaching career brought me back to Elgin. I was privileged to work at my alma mater, Elgin High School, in 1918. In the summer, I worked at D.C. Cook Publishing Company as an editor and ended up working there for more than 7 years. Oh, I forgot to tell you that I also worked at the watch factory. I worked there from 1942 to 1955. I worked in the screw department, the receiving department, and finally the service department before retiring. I also, while there, was a contributor to the company's publication. It was a monthly publication called The Watchword. I was one of the contributors. There's a picture of me in the background here, and you can look at that later as one of the correspondents for the magazine. There's also a picture of me in this particular edition, and this was the year I retired. There were 3 of us that were featured, and you'll notice that I've lost a little weight since then. I just don't have the same appetite that I used to have. Well, when I came back to Elgin, I lived with my parents on River Bluff Road, 332. It was a Sears Kit house, a lovely house, and I enjoyed that neighborhood so much. The house overlooked the Fox River. It had a wooded area behind the house. I could enjoy the animals, the deer, and I was known to keep the door of the house open sometimes, and there were an occasional squirrel or 2 that actually came into our house. I also enjoyed the girls in the neighborhood, the young girls who would come to visit and say hello, and we had a lovely time. I hope your neighborhoods are as delightful as mine. I was a member of the First Congregational Church. I also was an active participant in the Old Settlers Association, and also a strong supporter of the Elgin Area Historical Society, which was established in 1961. Now, another organization that I was particularly fond of and felt so rewarding was the AAUW, which is the American Association of University Women. And I met many wonderful women in Elgin while being a member in that organization. I died November 19th, 1976, at the age of 86. I died at St. Joseph's Hospital At that point in time, I had been living at Bo's retirement home. And that was on Division Street and Gifford. And I understand that home is still in operation today. You won't find my gravesite here or in Dundee. I donated my body for scientific study. Now, I've been going on and on about myself. I said I wanted to share some Elgin history. As a matter of fact, that was one of my favorite things to do. From 1966 to 1974, I wrote a weekly column in the Elgin Free Press entitled Old Elgin Tales. And I wrote all different kinds of topics in Elgin. I thought I might just read a portion of one of them to give you a little Elgin history and also to give you a flavor of my writing style. So with your permission, I'll just read part of it. This was in April 19th, 1972, the story of Elgin's first bridges. Gossip has it that 3 or 4 young ladies who lived in Elgin in the early days should be credited with the construction of the first bridge across the Fox River to connect East Elgin with West Elgin. Not that the young ladies actually built the bridge with their own hands, but rather by their most unladylike behavior, they shocked the masculine early settlers into realizing that they had to build a bridge across the Fox. Gentlemen in those days were too gentlemanly to even disclose the names of the young ladies who had shocked everybody. No doubt they put the blame on what happened on James T. Gifford's head, for it was he who was conceived of establishing a city which should be on both sides of the river, because, as he explained, the river would furnish water power to grind corn and wheat, to saw the logs needed to build houses, to turn the wheels of industry, and make Elgin a great city. So the town decided to let Mr. Gifford and his brother Hezekiah and his friend E.K. Mann form a committee to raise money and build a bridge so that this scandalous event would not happen again. Oh, I haven't yet divulged to you just what that scandalous act had taken place. So here's the story. It was the year 1837, just 2 years after the Giffords and all their big family and the Kimballs and all their big family had come west and built themselves log cabins on both sides of the Fox River. To be sure, historians tell us that the Fox at this point was wider and more shallow at that time. Men who had to cross the river forded it with their wagons or carriages or mounted on the backs of their horses. If they had no other way to reach the other side, they swam or waded across. But of course, real ladies never would or could do any of those things. There was a boat which took passengers from one side of the river to the other, just about where the Chicago Street Bridge is now, or a little to the north. But that did not operate at all hours of the day and night. And knowing that young ladies then, as now, like to shop around both the west side and the east side, these young ladies tarried too long, and when they wanted to return home, they found that the boat was no longer operating. So they knew of no way to get back to their own side of the river but to take off their shoes and stockings, pick up their long floor-length dress skirts, and also their heavily ruffled petticoats, and lifting them as high as they dared, they waded across the river. And so they shall always be nameless. Let us remember that the credit for Elgin having bridges goes to these young ladies. And the article goes on then. I write about the bridges that actually were built. I hope that gives you an idea of the flavor of my writings, and you are welcome to read any of the old Elgin tales. A couple of people in Elgin collected my articles and put them in scrapbooks, and there were more than 300 articles saved. They were collected, they were copied, indexed, and bound. The Gale Borden Library has a couple copies of these, or you can read some of the articles at the Elgin Area Historical Museum. I know I am not the only person who has written Elgin history. There were several that came before me, and many have come after me. I think it's important that we acknowledge those who preserve Elgin history. 2 names right now come to mind, 2 gentlemen who have had their own columns. One is Mr. Jerry Turnquist, who writes a column, and one is Mr. E.C. Mike Elft, who, of course, has had a column and has written many, many books. Please, if you see them, thank them for their efforts. It's important that we preserve our history. And when you do see them, tell them that Hazel Bell sends her regards. Thank you for coming.
there. I'm so glad I made it in home time to see you. I was at church earlier today, congregational church, and Pastor Gord was a little verbose, if you know what I mean. And then afterwards, I had to talk to some of my Eastern Star sisters, and then wait for my brother Carl and his wife Elizabeth to be ready to go home. You'll probably know my brother Carl Whitstrom. He has the jewelry store on Chicago Street with Johnson and Whitstrom. Johnson will switch the names would be just not good. Well, Carl and my parents, Emma and Frederick, met and married in Minnesota. Both had been married before, and they lost their spouses, but each had a child. And upon their marriage, they had 6 more. In 1891, Father decided to move to Elgin, and he was a carpenter here. I had just finished high school, so I was looking forward to the opportunity of coming to a new place too. Father got busy right away, and in November of 1891, I got a position at the Elgin National Watch Company. I was hired to work in the balance department. Now, balances in a watch are much like pendulums in a clock, the movement to keep things going. And I worked in one department for about a month, and then they moved me within the department to the screw department. That's where I worked for quite a long time. Now, when you worked at the watch factory, you started your job at 7 in the morning and you worked till noon, had lunch for an hour, and then back at 1 till 5 o'clock. You were made aware of the time of the day because at 7 o'clock, the watch company's whistle went off to alert people you better be up and getting ready. At 10 minutes of 7, the whistle blew for another long minute, a 10-minute warning. And then the very minute before, it blew again. If you were not at your workstation within 5 minutes after the opening of the day, you were not coming to work because the doors were closed out to the outside. Now, when you worked, women were expected to dress appropriately in nice, clean clothing. Men were the same way. Smoking not allowed inside the factory or even on the grounds. Men could have chewing tobacco if they wanted to. No throwing of anything out the windows. And you were not to read or talk at your workstation, even if you didn't have parts to work on. Now, there were 10 departments in the watch factory at that time, and the watch factory in Elgin had started in 1865. They didn't produce their first watch till 1867, and had some of their early employees come from Waltham, Massachusetts, and the Waltham Watch Company. Now, we sold watches all the time. They were just being manufactured. We couldn't keep up with the demand. You might wonder why. Railroads. That's the reason. Railroads. Imagine being on a train, on a track, at the same time, at the same place, with another train coming the opposite direction. Knowing the time was most important. So time zones were recognized and created, and employees, particularly of the railroads, had watches, had clocks in the station, and the railroads were really building west. They were the western frontier, you know, in the 1830s here in Elgin. So, the real reason for those watches started with the railroads. Well, coming back to the apartment that I was in the balance department, oh, things were going marvelous. The watch factory had all kinds of activities that we could participate in. There would be sporting activities, music activities. I served on the relief committee and just had a lot of social interaction with people. 1893, the economic panic takes over America. Companies were concerned, could they even survive? The watch company decided to cut Saturday hours, 2 Saturdays in June. But by mid-July, they needed to cut employment. And out of an employment of 3,000 people, they cut 1,400 positions. Those people lost their jobs. Some moved away. Some found other jobs in the area. I was fortunate to get a job in Chicago. Those who lived in housing provided by the watch factory at the National House ended up losing their housing because they weren't working for the watch factory anymore. But by 1895, got called back to work. And when you were called back, you came back, because if you didn't, you would never be extended an invitation to work at the watch factory again. In 1921, we combined the balance department and the spring department together. And in 1927, I became the first female job master of the screw department. The first female supervisor in the entire factory. Amazing. We also started making wristwatches at the time. Soldiers had come back from World War II and realized that pocket watches had an impracticability to them, and they had seen soldiers using wristwatches, so the demand for that type of watch took place. I'm going to want to share some facts with you, and I'm going to need to change to some other glasses. Now, when I mentioned that I was the first woman supervisor, listen to this. In 1910, there were 13,686 females in Elgin and 12,290 males. Since 1870, there were more males than men in Elgin. And 35.2% of those women were female singles. I fit right in. I was a part of that large number. Nationally, 58.9% of the nation, women had gotten married, but 51.6% in Elgin had gotten married. 6,095 wage earners in Elgin were men, and 2,352 were female. Women were a part of the economic force in Elgin. I retired in 1937 after 20 years in the screw department, and I felt very proud of what I had done. I also had become the owner of the home on Lincoln, which I had been living in with my mother until she had died. I really have enjoyed being able to grow flowers. There's some of them from my garden. And as you leave today, I hope you enjoy yourself, and be sure to notice the flowers as you go. Goodbye.
Good morning.
My, the cemetery's a busy place today. Must be something special going on. Just a few minutes ago, a youngster came scooting by here and wanted to know if I was the greenhouse king. There's a term I haven't heard for a number of years, the greenhouse king. Most people that just sort of knew me called me Uncle George. But George is my name, that's what my friends call me. George Souster, horticulturist, nurseryman, florist. My wife and I had a floral shop in downtown Elgin and a big greenhouse operation along Adams Street, right where across the state, just north of the state hospital property. In fact, the state hospital is where I got my start in Elgin. No, ma'am, I wasn't born there. No, sir, I wasn't committed there. I came there in 1872 for a job. In fact, I was the very first employee hired at the state hospital, other than Dr. Kilborn himself, of course. I started out as a baker. Now, a baker's a good job, but it can be a perilous one. And after a few years, I began to feel that. So one day, you might say, how does a baker become a florist? Not much in common there, other than an interest in flowers. One day, after I had gotten the pies in the oven for that evening's dinner, I took a little stroll on the ground. And off in the distance, I noticed Dr. Kilborn, a finely dressed gentleman, walking about, stopping, making notes, writing in his little notebook, talking. When I caught up with him, Dr. Kilborn introduced me to Mr. John Ware, famous landscape architect from Chicago. Oh my! Landscape architect. Wow! And I'm thinking, what is a landscape architect? I had never heard of such a thing before. Well, Dr. Kilborn, being a perceptive man, typical to his profession, said that the landscape architect would design the grounds where the gardens and the pathways and the lagoons would be, and that there very soon would be hiring a landscape gardener. I said right away, that's the job I would like to have. I could be the landscape gardener. And sure enough, I was hired as the landscape gardener. And over the next 5 years, my little crew of 2 men and myself were planted over 5,000 trees on that property. We laid out nearly 2 miles of walking paths. We erected several little arbors, one big gazebo. We helped scoop out the ground for a lagoon in front of the main building. And I lost almost 20 pounds and never felt better. Strong and vigorous. Well, in my 11th year at the hospital, I got married. Married Miss Margaret Mary Grace, supervisor on the ladies' wards. We had started at the hospital on the same time. And after a long and gentle courtship, we were wed. Right there in the hospital chapel, Dr. Kilborn gave away the bride. Then a few weeks later, with the doctor's blessings, we left the hospital and bought that land along Adams Street. Set up as market gardens, growing vegetables and ornamental plants and such. Built themselves a little house. Later on, built a bigger house. At the time, we set up a greenhouse, and then another, and then a third. And in a few years, we had 9 of them all along Adams Street there, heated by steam, which allowed us to get into the flower business. And we went into that, opened up our little flower shop in downtown Elgin. Well, I never really left the hospital, in a sense, because I came back as a volunteer, played the organ, I entertained with my barbershop quartet. Mary Margaret, she helped out festivals and special occasions. The hospital was a dear place to us. Elgin was a dear place to us. We did well here. Over the years, business grew. But around the time of the Great War, I began to wind down. Getting about was increasingly hard. Rheumatism had set in. Times were tough for me. I needed a wheelchair just to scoot about the floor. Around New Year's 1923, I knew that I was winding down. But my daughter had a son, my grandson, George South. Oh, what a joy that child was. Life renews itself through succeeding generations. That baby was so precious to me. A few weeks after that, I passed away. Right over there. It's thawing spring soil. An appropriate setting for a nursery. It's a little epilogue to my story. A few years after I died, the state hospital broke down along that boundary we shared. 6 new brick buildings, wards for patients. Those wards they named Southster Cottage. Quite an honor. Most state hospital buildings were named for doctors and politicians, not for landscape gardeners and road sweepers. Well, my daughters took over the floral business. We ran that for another 25 years. And then they sold out the flower shop to their employee, Maureen Lasher. She ran it under the name of Southster Lasher Florist in downtown Elgin to 1976. 50 years in that shop for her. 30 more for the Southster. The storefront's still there today, occupied by a place that's now a great.
I started out at Franklin School, and then high school moved into Franklin School, so we had to go to another school wing, and then we left high school. In those days, everybody seemed to be a member of a gang. Our gang was a Chapel Street gang, centered on Chapel Street and East Chicago Street. We felt we were pretty good. One time we went over there to St. John's, beat up those Germans. That was our downfall. But we thought we were so good, we went over to St. Mary's. Well, we outnumbered those Catholics. It was 3-1, but they cleaned our clock. Only one of their gang was one of the ones who ran away first. Now, it was just as bad as on the west side. You couldn't go north of Lawrence before you run into the top building. We enjoyed life. One of our habits was growing up on Arclight Tower, where the police could use to ride down. Or we'd hop a freight on Milwaukee Road downtown, going slow, and then we'd hop off again at Charlie Creek and have a swim. Or we would, high school, call up the operator on the interstate, Chicago Telephone. We had 2 telephone lines. And on a Sunday evening when the lines weren't busy, we'd talk to the telephone operator, imagine how pretty she was for half an hour or so, until she finally hung up on us. Well, we were in school, we were members of the Knockers, the Washingtons, and we had a very good time. Now some of you are going to hear Hazelbell Perry. We were classmates in the class of 1908. She was very studious, which I was not. We both became journalists of the sort, except that she was a lot better student, went to Northwestern University, became a suffragette. Well, since it's a good time, in addition to having fun, I became a journalist of sorts when I was in high school. I fought on the local papers as a high school correspondent, $5 a semester. And after I got out of high school, I I became a cub reporter in Aurora, Waukegan, and Joliet. In fact, I worked for 3 newspapers in Joliet, and that's where I learned to smoke cigar. A cigar at a Joliet bar. They only asked me to demonstrate it's 2 women. Then from Joliet, I came back to Elgin, got a job at the Daily Trade, and really enjoyed it. I covered the sports. We go up to Rockford, train, have lunch in the dining car, come back. Or we go down to Aurora on the Interurban, lurch and swayed all the way for an hour and a half to Aurora, where we cover the games in Eastern Illinois. And everything was going well, and I was pretty cocky in my late 20s, until that fateful day, December of 1918. That's when the editor told me to go up to Dundee and cover the lecture by this anti-cigarette smoker. She was a crusader, spoke all over the United States of the evils of cigarettes. Now I had heard her 2 or 3 times, but I said, well, I probably do not. So I wrote a really good article about our lecture and published it earlier. And then the next day the telephone rang at the office. Are you aware that Lillian never showed up to a lecture? She canceled out. Well, the editor just didn't give a lecture. He gave me the old vote. Then I had to leave town. Went to Leavenworth Park and became a journalist for Motion Picture Trade magazine. Now, when you're a reporter in the early days, now they call them staff members, you give a byline. You really weren't paid much. And then the Depression came on, was the trade magazine folded, and I decided I'd better come back to this at least. And I caught on with a magazine called the Fountain County News published in South. It was really sad. All the Leonard Fowler publishers paid money. You got your picture in the magazine and light it. And I did see the right. Then I was lucky. Courier News took me back. That began the second part of my week. I'll go back and get into the outfit in the second period. Courier took me back, gave me an old job of reporting sports, just like I did in the old days. And it was very enjoyable work. And then I started interspersing my columns. I talked about how Belgium was back in the 20th century. And then I would intersect conversations about people, how things do happen in town. And so the editor said, you know, we're going to move you over to the second page. Fixture there. My column is called Gunshots. And then from there, they moved to the editorial page. Year after year, I wrote columns, 5 columns a week, every day. 3,000 columns in all. Mike Bailey wrote 1 a week. And during the Second World War, I wrote a column about what was happening in Elgin during the past week. People could flip out that column and send it to their sons and daughters in service. So my column was read practically all over the world. At least that's what they told me when they came back from the Army and Navy. Well, my cigarette smoking and cigar smoking caught up with me. And in 1950, I got throat cancer. I had to stop my column at 51. I hope that starts cigar smoking. But I had an enjoyable life, even though I died relatively early. I enjoyed living in Elgin. I enjoyed all the people I met. And column by sitting at the bar at the Elks Club every evening. And I learned more from the businessmen, the politicians, and the lawyers than I could learn any other way. And I'd come back to the Courier and write my column, and I'm also the one who ran that column about what happened in Elgin 100 years ago, and 75 years ago, and 50 years ago. And I'd always urge people to go to the library, where I did, to get information about what happened in the past from those old brown newspapers. And one other thing I advise readers to do, and it stems from the fact that after a while, when someone in the family died, and they'd submit an obituary, and they'd say, "Gun, touch it up, will you? Or fix it up." So I was writing a lot of the family obituaries too. Now that isn't done anymore. The family tells the facts to the undertaker, as the funeral record, and the facts are all good. But I said, if you want to write your own obituaries, who knows more about your life than you do? And if you want it to be the way you would like it, get somebody else. Thank you for coming here this afternoon. Do well.
Thank you.
Rated in genealogy. Increase Bosworth was a very wealthy banker, but his personal story will be covered at some other time, probably in a future cemetery walk. First of all, notice that here on each corner of the plot is a big B. One here, one down there, and at the ends of the plot. Most families wouldn't have been able to afford this, and I think it's interesting that a banker's first name is Increase. Anyway, the center monument is a very stunning Acacia is a herb grown in the Mediterranean, and here is obviously used for decorative purposes.
That this is the most exciting time in history. The term. As a boy in Germany, I was always fascinated by my father's talk of harnessed lightning. Harnessed lightning. I tried to understand what he meant by that. You know, it's been obvious to people for centuries that the giant random displays of fire in the night sky were probably electrical charges gone out of control. But over the past century, step by step, little by little, man has taken steps to take that out of God's hands and put it into our own. Think of Benjamin Franklin, who in 1748 used his Leyden jar and a kite string to give us a better understanding of that phenomenon. And then the Italians, Luigi Galvani and Alessandro Volta, who also helped to enhance our knowledge and understanding. And now, almost a century later, or more than a century later, about 150 years later, we have finally arrived to the point where we have that wonderful phenomenon, electricity, in the control of our own hands. And we're doing things with it. My journey to Elgin began in my native town of Vlota, Germany, where as a boy I studied science, and I also experimented with electricity, like many young men did. When I first came to the United States, my first stop was Washington, D.C. There in Washington, D.C., I was able to work in the United States government printing office to install an electrical power system there. After that, I was fortunate to work with the wonderful Thomas Edison, the electrical genius. Side by side, I worked with him, and in fact, I worked installing an electrical system in Mr. Edison's house. Now, when you think of Thomas Edison as an inventor, what would you say that the most commonly known invention of Mr. Edison was?
Light bulb.
Any guesses?
Light bulb.
The electric light bulb, the incandescent electric light bulb. I imagine that, like myself, you use incandescent electric light bulbs in your home to light up the night and perhaps to illuminate your Christmas trees. But the true genius of Mr. Edison and others like him was not the invention of the electric light bulb, but the development of the ability to generate and control the electricity to make those things possible. That's the genius, and that's been my life's work. You see, as the chief engineer of the Elgin City, Carpentersville, and Aurora Electric Railway Company, I am responsible for generating and maintaining the power to the greatest invention of this century, the electric street railway. Okay, let's pay attention to that. The electric street railway. Now, for almost a century, we've had railways. We've had the giant steam behemoths, the iron monsters, that travel from coast to coast of this country, carrying their passengers, freight, and cattle from coast to coast in a matter of a few days. You know what? Until very recently, if you lived in Carpentersville and you wanted to go to Elgin, you either had to own a horse or a very good pair of shoes and a warm coat in the wintertime. And so in just 20 years, we have gone, in just 20 years, we have gone from horse transportation and foot transportation to the point we are today where we have an absolutely wonderful interurban public transport system. And that's what our company provides. We have workers who work in the watch factory that now have the ability to get on the trains that we provide, on the electric street trains that we provide. And they're able to get on at their homes, onto a warm and comfortable train, and travel from wherever they are, Park Street, Congdon Avenue, Highland Avenue, South State Street, to the watch factory, to go to their jobs and return. And their families can travel, including those people who live in Carpentersville and Aurora, on our trains to downtown Elgin, shop there. We have main lines on all of those streets that I mentioned, Park Street, North and South, State Street, Congdon, Highland, and more. And they all converge at Fountain Square. And there at Fountain Square, we have a wonderful transfer station where people can sit comfortably and wait for the departures and arrivals to be announced by the conductors on their megaphones. And so we've developed a very good, modern, reliable, and safe system. And when you put all that together and you recognize all the track that we had to lay, we started this from the ground up. We had to put the track in onto the streets that were already there. We recognized that it was a very, very heavy technical undertaking. And so we provide these kinds of engineering documents to our workmen. These are the things we use to show how to properly install the track, to cut in to the old concrete and asphalt of the existing road bed, or if they're installing a new one, how to do that. We have other drawings for that purpose. How to properly mount the foundations and the tracks on the foundations, and how to weld the tracks properly. And this is also used for maintaining and upkeeping, the upkeep of the system. Now our trains run during the day. We start at 5 o'clock in the morning and we run till late at night. What do you suppose happens after the trains stop? That's when the maintenance repair people begin their work. They go into the car barn and there they maintain. They clean, they paint, they repair, they weld, and they keep our equipment in top condition so that tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock every day of the week, these trains can run again and serve the public well. Now, our conductors are the face of our company. They're the ones who are out there meeting the public. We train them to be safe, we train them to be courteous, and we train them to be on time. But they also do another job for us. You see, our conductors fill out these passenger records on every trip. They meticulously fill in the information, and then they provide that back to us at the end of the day. And we, the management, then take that and we put it on charts and graphs, and we use that to manage our company. We use it to plan revisions to our routes and upgrades to our service, to know exactly what the patterns are for the public who's using our system. And we're very proud of that. I have been very fortunate to work for this company and to be a part of it, and it's enabled me to have a good life today. As you can see here by this photograph of my home, which is on East Chicago Street, I was able to provide a very nice home for my family, for my wife Elisa, my sons William and Rudolph, and it's a unique architectural style. I'm very proud of that. But I also want to mention that conveniently, right outside my home, on East Chicago Street, in front of the front door, is a trolley stop. Now, I know that, we're talking about new things, we're talking about developments in the new inventions that come along. And there are those of us, myself included, probably you too, who like the old days. Just to remind myself that it's not just us humans that remember the old days fondly, I keep this drawing on my desk in my office. It's a drawing of this former trolley horse, now out to pasture, with his bell still hanging around his neck, looking sadly at the electrical machine that made him obsolete. Thank you.
Good afternoon, friends and neighbors. My name is Joseph Gardner, but you can call me Captain. Quite a great monument here, don't you think? Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that in a few moments, but first I'd like to tell you a little bit about me, my life, and my family. A life which often found me on the move, even after my death. I was a descendant of the Puritans. I was born in Gloucester, Massachusetts, in the month of April on the 27th day of the year of 1802. Growing up on the East Coast gave this young lad plenty of opportunities to see ships of varying sizes and shapes come in and out of the ports and the harbors up and down the East Coast. It gave me great fodder and inspiration to become a man of the sea, to sail across the oceans, to visit faraway exotic lands. So that's exactly what I did, using ships both small and large. Now, we all know that every good ship needs a well-seasoned crew, plenty of wind in its sails, strong riggings, and you may not know this, but it also needs a mighty anchor. My greatest anchor was that of my family. So let us talk for a moment about the greatest crew that I had ever served. I was married in Boston, Massachusetts in October of 1828 to a beautiful young girl who was from Ipswich, Massachusetts, named Elizabeth Brown. Elizabeth and I waited some 10 years before we started our family, whilst I learned my trade at sea. In August of 1838, our first of 4 children were born. A girl by the name of Anna blessed our home. 14 months thereafter, a second girl was born, and we named her Mary Jane. However, you never called her Mary Jane. She always wanted to be referred to as Jeannie. So we called her Jeannie. In 1843, February, finally, our first son was born. I was so ecstatic I named him after me, Joseph. But we gave him the middle initial of X. You know, as in X marks the spot, or that big black X you would find on a treasure map, you know, where all the gold was buried. Well, Joseph was my treasure. His middle initial was X. In January of 1845, our fourth and final child was born. His name was Charles. Charles, unfortunately and sadly, did not live to see his second birthday, passing away at the tender age of 1 year and 9 months old. Throughout this time period, I became a captain, and I sailed up and down the east coast of the United States, delivering goods to and from the Mediterranean Sea. Oftentimes, we would set sail for the Turkish ports of Smyrna or Constantinople or Trabzon. Many a time we would drop anchor in Spain, in Portugal, and in Barcelona and Valencia. A voyage to Gibraltar was always very profitable, as were our many voyages to the ports in and around the islands of Greece and the nation that looks like a boot, Italy. Let us not forget those many ports on the North African shore as well. But the largest port in our day was named Odessa and could be found at the beginning or the opening of the Black Sea in a land called the Ukraine. Now, depending upon our assignment, our paperwork, our destinations, our hold would contain a variety of different cargo. For example, we would carry lumber, oil, grain, iron, coal, cotton, fish, fresh fruit, dried fruit, flour, wine, or molasses. We would also collect quite a few stories along the way, none of which I can share with this mixed crowd today. There is one story, though, I would like to share with you. It's the story of the Portsmouth Lighthouse. Folks, life at sea was never easy. Oftentimes it was very dangerous. Storms could come upon you without warning. Winds could change at a moment's notice. Seas of glass could quickly come on deck and sweep away anything or anyone that was not securely fastened. And then there was the fog. Always the fog. And always near a coastline, making navigation into the port nearly impossible. This is when our trained crew would come on deck, and they would focus their eyes on where they thought the horizon was, looking for those beacons of light that would emanate from a variety of lighthouses up and down the coast, strategically placed. Did you know that each and every lighthouse is different? Not in the way that it looks, not in the physical structure, but in the light that emanates from it. For example, our crew knew that a light that shone brightly for 3 seconds and then dark for 7, on for 3, dark for 7, was a very specific lighthouse. Perhaps the lighthouse at Boston Harbor. Its light shone differently than all others. I'll never forget that late spring evening. We were 33 days out of Odessa, headed back to America. The Massachusetts, the Massachusetts coastline was clearly in sight. We all could see it. A storm, a storm of epic proportion came in at a moment's notice, surely blowing us way off course. We couldn't control our ship. We were all afraid that we would be dashed against the rocks of the shoreline, and like so many crew members and ships before us, unsuccessfully finish our journey. No sooner than that storm came upon us, it left with an eerie calm around us. Then that damn fog came in. It surrounded us to the point where we could not see the stars above, nor could we even see the maps and the compass in front of our own faces. This dead calm we had to wait out. All hands on deck, as eyes were trained on where we thought the horizon was, and it was some 4 hours later that one of our crew members yelled, "There it is! There it is!" We all looked in his direction, and faintly through the fog, we could see a light that shone for 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off, 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off. We immediately recognized that as the Portsmouth Lighthouse. We were exactly where we needed to be. Thanks to that lighthouse, our crew was able to find the port without incident, and we arrived with crew, cargo, and ship intact. All thanks to the Portsmouth Lighthouse. These kind of storms, at my age, I'm near 50 now, getting a little much for me. So I took my acquired wealth, I grabbed my family, packed them up, and at the age of 51, moved westward to the banks of the Fox River, to a little settlement that we had heard about out in Massachusetts called Elgin. We arrived here in 1853, but we only stayed a very short period of time. For you see, we removed to Iowa, where we became farmers for approximately 9 years, returning then to Elgin in 1862, where we spent the next 19 years. Now a man of some 60 years old, I decided that I was going to retire. And Elgin was a wonderful place in which to do so. It was here that I watched my children grow, marry, have children of their own, and it was a sheer joy